Today, we're going to reference Sports Card Radio, a comment from them in the last few days that I think is really important and is a good leaping point to touch on some of the things I've spoken about in the past as a bit of a reminder for you guys when it comes to approaching card collecting. I think this is a common sense kind of thing and maybe goes without saying, but given all this Topps Mercury stuff with Victor Wembanyama and all these other FOMO flipping BS that is essentially going on at the moment, all these pump and dumps, I think this is a good reminder, like I said, to talk about these things again, to make things crystal clear about, what, in my opinion, you should be doing long term when it comes to building your collections. And it comes to this comment over here that, Colin from Sports Card Radio, Colin is the one that runs the Sports Card Radio Instagram account, referenced somebody's post over here. And this is from Bean's Ball Card blog on Twitter. And then it was an Instagram post. The post basically says his uncle started him in the hobby, when he was 7. He's collected since childhood. He quit the hobby around age 50. He couldn't understand it at the time. But now that he's at the age of 45, he's starting to understand where he's coming from. He's getting pretty close to making a similar decision for himself. And what he sort of goes on to talk about in his post specifically, like you can sort of see here, is that he doesn't like the current state of this hobby and where things are heading, i.e. what, Topps is essentially doing with these Mercury releases for Victor Wembanyama, all this, Topps Chrome unlicensed BS, this trend of pushing things towards breakers, etc., etc. Nothing really new. You guys know this story. You guys probably feel the same way. We're heading into very strange waters, in my opinion. And this guy's essentially using that as a reason to feel pretty down about the hobby as a whole. But the comment I want to reference here from Colin is what you're sort of seeing at the bottom. He says he only buys athletes, or you should only be buying athletes you have emotional attachment to. Forget about the brands of the hobby, all the shenanigans, just buy what you like, essentially. And this goes back to things that I've touched on this channel so many times, right? The most important thing for card collecting to me and any sort of collectible is the cultural relevance, right? The reason why you collect that thing in the first place. For me, when I'm collecting the Parramatta Eels cards, they're a rugby team here in Australia. It's because I've grown up watching those players, those teams. I'm a member. I go to every single game. When it comes to cards like this Kobe over here from Select 1314, Kobe, goes without saying, right? He was so culturally relevant, not just when it comes to basketball. Even people that don't follow the sport of basketball knew who he was, right? He connected with so many people for so many different things. And that set in of itself is another set that I like to chase. So like 1314, I've talked about that a crap ton as well. It was the first hobby boxes that I sort of got into. So I'm actively chasing cards from that set because I've got that emotional attachment to them, right? They're culturally relevant for me. But so many people are sort of lost on that fact and are sort of stretching themselves to go ahead and buy things that maybe people don't really care about. Like people are just buying them for the sake of buying them to try and flip them. But if all the cards were to fall or all the dominoes were to fall down, are people still going to want those cards? And those are things I've talked about before. And I sort of responded to Colin's comment and said this over here. He went ahead and reshared it. Going to say, I couldn't agree more. Emotional attachment and cultural relevance is where things are at. Modern flippers / collectors have lost sight of this and it's going to bite them down the line. And the reason why I think it's going to bite people down the line are the things that I just touched on. People collect things for a certain reason. They like Kobe for a certain reason. They like Michael Jordan for a certain reason. They like first-year products for a certain reason. But what sort of happens is people obviously get priced out of those things because everybody wants them for a reason, right? So they become too expensive. So you move like one deviation away from it. So it's like, okay, instead of first-year Prism, I'm going to go for second-year Prism. And then that same thing happens, right? And then before you know it, you're only really being able to afford maybe a 10th year Prism for a certain player. But when all things are said and done, is that 10th year Prism going to hold up in terms of being wanted by the wider card collecting community down the line? Maybe, maybe not. But there is that fear that sort of exists there. And it doesn't just happen with, years of products. It happens also with, different sports. You've seen people, like I've said, I've used this example so many times in the past, so the regulars will be sick of it, but you look at soccer, right? Soccer is a big one. You look at women's sports, you look at some other things where people are sort of priced out of the main categories, the big sports like football, basketball, baseball. So they go ahead and start going a little bit further. The same thing with F1. They're like, well, these other sports are a bit expensive. I'm going to try and chase them instead because, you know what? Nobody's really seeing them right now. Nobody's really chasing them, but maybe long-term they're going to be as big as what these other sports are. And that's all well and good until everybody else starts doing the same thing. And before you know it, the whole market for F1, the whole market for soccer, the whole market for women's basketball cards are prospectors and are doing the exact same thing you are. So you've got this like ceiling being set, this floor being set that's completely artificial. It's not tangible. And when things aren't relevant anymore, like there's maybe no money in those cards anymore, or, a GFC hits again or something along those lines, and people need to sell them, who's going to be there to buy them, right? That's the thing you need to be asking yourself as well. And that's, again, where cultural relevance comes in, because those sports typically are not culturally relevant in the US when it comes to collecting. Women's sports is building, which is fantastic. I have pretty big sets of the Parramatta Eels rugby team. We've put out some sets in the last few years, which are amazing. I've collected them pretty hard. But, soccer doesn't have a big following in the US to go ahead and chase cards, to pay big money for cards. That's part of the reason why, again, I've been able to buy so much flawless soccer for so cheap compared to what US sports sell for. The same thing with F1. Yes, it's getting a big following in terms of watching the sport, but there's no real attachment when it comes to buying those things yourselves. Even with like vintage soccer in Europe, right? It's all about stickers and stuff like that. But again, they're not actively chased like collecting is in the US or is in the UK or is here in Australia. It doesn't work the same way. They're not treated with the same, desire to chase. And I'm sort of rambling right now, but I think you guys, get where I'm going with what I'm trying to say. There's people that have moved all these deviations away from what was culturally relevant in the first place are going to be in a position where when things need to be sold and when all things are said and done, it's going to be very difficult to get your money back on those things, in my opinion, because people don't actually want those things. You've only chased them because you've moved 15 deviations away from the thing that was relevant in the first place. And I've given that example, quite a few times in the past, but I think we're seeing it more and more these days. And we've got so many flippers flipping between flippers that it's creating this artificial market. It's artificial liquidity, in my opinion. I think repacks are exactly the same thing. Breaking is also artificial liquidity. And if the music stops, where's that sustainable money going to come from? It's not going to keep propping these things up because people are going to move to the things that matter. First Year Exquisite, game use stuff, on-card autos, championship winning seasons, cards from, a really important milestone in that player's career, i.e. breaking, a certain number of games record or points record or something along those lines. Cards associated with those things are going to be the things that people want long-term. Because guess what? As a fan of the sport, and that's what it always comes back down to, in my opinion, you're going to buy that because you're a fan of that player or of that team, and it has something that means something to you, right? That emotional attachment that Colin mentioned in the intro, right? That stuff is there, and that's why you want it in the first place. That can't be forgotten, right? People need to remember that when you're going ahead and saying, well, I'm going to go ahead and invest $2,000 into F1 when I don't know anything about the sport. Yes, F1 has a huge following internationally, but is cards going to be the thing that person wants? I sort of look at pop culture the same way, to be honest. Pop culture cards. I've got a pretty big pop culture card that I picked up in the last couple of weeks that I think is going to be completely contradictory for what I'm about to say. But when I look at people spending 5-6 figures on pop culture cards, i.e. things like Iron Man cards, actor autographs, musician autographs on cards, it's like, well, those things are pretty cool to try and chase. But if you're a fan of the musician or you're a fan of the actor, there are so many other collectibles that are probably more relevant for you to go ahead and buy of that person. Yes, you're a card collector, so you want a card of that non-sports athlete or that non-athlete to try and chase for your collection. But that niche, to try and get a return on that card long-term, it needs to be really specific in order for you to get that to happen, right? It has to be a fan of that same actor, plus also a card collector for you to go ahead and get your return on that sale. When you're a fan of a musician, yeah, sure, a card is cool, but surely you'd much rather get an autograph of a signed album or a signed instrument or a signed concert ticket, something along those lines, right? There are all these other layers that, I'm just rambling off now, that feed into the same thing what I'm trying to say here, the cultural relevance, the emotional attachment to the collectible that you're buying in the first place. And this sounds, absolutely insane to have to talk to, in my opinion, because this is common sense to me. But there are so many people that this is lost on. I don't get it. And we've seen it, like I said in the intro, with this whole Victor Wembanyama stuff. You've seen this whole Mercury situation where people are praising this set and paying big money for these cards when you've already had so many other Victor, rookie cards come out, and they're purely paying it because of the hype. And you're looking at these cards that are popping up left, right, and center now, and they're all basically napkin patches. These things are filled with crappy patches like this. Almost every autograph is streaked, but they're chasing it because they think they have to based on what everybody else is doing. But it's guys, these things don't look good. Are these going to be the things that a Victor collector, a Wembanyama collector wants long term? Yeah, sure, it is game use gear, but it's on card auto too. But is this going to be the thing that people actually want long term? I just thought that was an interesting one to bring up, considering how crazy and crappy some of these things look and how much people are actually praising this set. You're paying $8,000 and you're getting a napkin patch. Come on, tops, pull your bloody fingers out. But I'm rambling now, as I often do, so I do apologize. But it goes back to that emotional attachment and cultural relevance. We buy these things for a reason, so it's always so weird to me that you've got people completely oblivious to that reason when they're going ahead and prospecting and chasing all this crap. I don't get it. And I'm seeing it more and more. And I thought things would have maybe got a bit clearer post the decline after, 2022, 2023, whenever it was. But it still seems as crazy as ever. And the whole Mercury situation brought that to light a little bit more, because you're seeing people go crazy about something that in the past people would have said, this is just ridiculous. The same thing with Topps Chrome, with how much money it cost, and then also how crappy some of those cards looked, and the fact that it was unlicensed. You've got people chasing all this stuff, despite it being something historically that people haven't referenced. And I know, things change, right? And that's how people make big money, right? Because they speculate, they prospect, and they try and identify something that's been undervalued to then therefore be appropriately valued in the future. But it just doesn't make sense when you try to do it with something that comes down to, an emotional attachment or cultural relevance. Like I don't get it. And one other point that I've given in the past is the same things that I just touched on, but with player positions, right? When you look at something like soccer, strikers are typically the ones that fans get the most excited about. So they have that bigger emotional attachment. And obviously players in other positions that are defenders or goalkeepers, etc., will have outlier players here and there that are, goats of their eras, the best players of their generation, that creates an excitement for people. But on average, it's typically the attacking people that, people get more excited about. And that then flows into cards, right? Because those cards typically then sell for more money. But what people do when they're trying to prospect and speculate is move more deviations away from that position. They go from a striker and say, well, defenders are undervalued, so I'm going to try and chase defenders now because I think this stuff could be equally priced compared to these strikers. When in reality, sure, you might be able to flip that between flippers in the interim, but long term, is a fan going to actively go ahead and chase a defender over a striker? No. Obviously, there's going to be some, outliers and stuff there, but you guys get what I'm saying, right? Cultural relevance is the most important thing when it comes to collecting cards. And that obviously feeds into, their performance as athletes, right? Because that then becomes the cultural relevance, right? There's a reason why LeBron cards suffer what they do. Because number one, he's a fairly good player, and his career is stretched beyond just the sport. So he's relevant to people that don't even know about basketball. Like I said for Kobe, like I said for Jordan, and many, many others. Same thing with Brady. Like there's a reason why people chase things, and it doesn't just come down to their on-field performance. And people forget about that, and it can't be forgotten about because it's super bloody important. So anyway, that was probably 10 or 12 minutes of saying the same thing over and over again. So I do apologize, but it's just a pet peeve of mine. This is something that's super important in my opinion that people have bloody forgot about, and it makes no sense to me whatsoever. So let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if you disagree or not. I would appreciate a like and a follow, and please share it if you can. The algorithm's been a bit funky lately as well, so if you can give me a like and a comment, that would be fantastic. If not, that is okay as well. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.